It's such a pleasure to be here this afternoon to welcome you all to this panel where we'll be looking at the landscape of what's happening around the world with regards to trans rights. So in recent years, there's been many conversations around gender identity, and we've seen significant progress when it comes to the advancement of legal gender recognition since 2012, where we've had, and the argument rages as to how many countries have legalized self-determined legal gender recognition, but we have counted 17. There's either between 17 and 21 countries that have advanced legal gender recognition by self-determination. However, there's been a lot of problems. There are still a lot of problems, and we're seeing a huge surge, a huge anti-trans backlash led by what's known as the anti-rights movement, or the anti-gender movement. And that has affected trans people around the world. And I'm so honored today to be joined by TP from Lesotho, Aisha from Pakistan, and Leanne, who's based in the UK. Aisha is a woman of trans experience who has achieved several notable accomplishments. She became the first trans woman to represent her government at the United Nations in Geneva. Her successes have also been globally recognized, and she has received an award from the Pakistani Army for her work in advocating for human rights for the trans and gender diverse community. She has served as a consultant to the Ministry of Human Rights in Pakistan and has been actively involved in trans and gender diverse empowerment and rights since 2015. She is also the co-founder of Wajud Society and currently is working as a director of programs at the Wajud Society while pursuing her PhD at the University of York, England. My next panelist I have is TP. He's Tampos Motopeng from Lesotho, very commonly known as TP. He's a passionate advocate for HIV and human rights, particularly for the LGBTIQ community in Lesotho. He has been actively involved with the People's Matrix Association since 2009, and he currently serves as the executive director. His dedication to promoting gender diversity communities has earned him recognition, including the prestigious Most Gender-Focused Leader Award from Finate of the BAM Group. He's committed to breaking the silence and ensuring that voices of marginalized people are heard in national programs. And lastly, we have Leanne McMillan, Canadian, that's now based in the United Kingdom. She has spent the last 30 years working with global human rights and LGBTQ organizations, focusing on developing strategies to promote human rights. She has led various leadership positions at Amnesty International and worked at the United Nations. She served as the Director of Policy and External Affairs at Freedom from Torture, as well as being the Director of the Research Development at the International Rehabilitation Council for Torture Victims. She has such an extensive resume. She's collaborated with law enforcement, legal professionals, policymakers, and national human rights institutions in different contexts. So with that, I would just like to hand the conversation over to my panelists and ask you all to tell me what's the basic landscape? What's the landscape like for trans and gender diverse people in your various countries? Starting with you, TP.
Thank you very much, Ricky. And thank you for the opportunity for me to reflect the work that we do in Lesotho with the colleagues. I come from the Mountain Kingdom of Lesotho. I work closely with the communities. For us, it's about reflecting back on the values of our communities prior colonialization of the countries. For me, it's about the visibility of the communities. It's about the journeys that we have gone through as the communities post-independence of our the colonization of the countries or before then. Because I'm saying this because it's about reflecting back to say, in our nations, in our Basotho nations or African nations, we have been recognized, we have been visible. We know in the context of Lesotho, where we know we have had the words like Tarasi and the words like sorry about that, it's a local language, bringing people just to naming the intersex communities, naming the transgender communities, and also honoring them in the space because they were used also as not necessarily the gods, but as trusted people within the communities, where the nation knew that when we had specific identities within our communities, the rain will fall, or when we pray for certain things, then people trusted that that thing will happen in the system. But post then came colonialism, where people then where people were now named as different things, not necessarily honored as they used to be honored, or respected as they used to be respected. Then the language of sodomy came on board. The language of that allowed people to know that some people are Christians, some are not Christians, came on board. Then this is where the struggle started. So now today we're talking about the context of our countries. Then this is where we are reflecting to say, as the country, yes, there's a way to identify the communities, unlike in other countries. I know the Zimbabwean context is very difficult than Lesotho. In our country, yes, there's a limited, not necessarily to say the perfect way to identify the country, but the community, but there's a specific way to allow the communities to coexist in the space, and also for people to legally be recognized in a very limited way. So this is where our struggle starts, because when we look into our country, though it was not necessarily colonized, but also protected under the British laws, then being proximity from the nation that was colonized, being South Africa, then there are specific aspects of culture that were inherited within our context that also imposed oppression and stigmatization of the communities in the country. So now we're talking about centering our discussions around trans identities and intersex identities. This is where you find that most of our community members then have limited access to specific services. And we also find that there is certain aspects of services that are denied because of the attitudes of people, not because of the legal framework of the country. Yes, there's limited, the legal framework is somehow protective, but also not necessarily protective to the communities. But also with that silence of the country, or the silence of the legal framework, there's provision for people to coexist in the space, but also limiting certain aspects of protection of the community.
Okay, great. So just as a follow-up to that question, you mentioned the trans and gender diverse people and the intersex people. What's the correlation between the two? I mean, how, in as far as the possibility for protection of trans and gender diverse people in Lesotho, what does that look like for intersex people?
It's a good question. As I mentioned before, that the two communities were identified as Tarasies, and also the other given names in Sesotho. The trans liberation for me, I'm trying to answer your question, but also the trans liberation for me is a gateway to the identification and coexistence of diversity in the country. So the two are not different, but the two identities are one identity in my view, because there is no way you can push trans issues without pushing intersex issues in the country, because also the way the communities or the societies of Basotho sees or perceive transgender identities, they also see it in the same eyes or in the same lens as intersex community. So there's no way you can differentiate the two. It's all about supporting the communities to also understand and embrace differences between the identities, but also with the sense of centering diversity within the communities. This is where intersectionality comes in, to talk about issues of women, issues of disability, and other issues. Because in our country, there are certain issues that you cannot mention in the public when talking about specific issues like trans identities, or like the sex as a taboo is considered as a taboo. And then when you start engaging in such sensitive discussions, then you open a leeway for other diversities to coexist. So yeah, that's in the nutshell what I can say.
Thanks. Yeah. So I have a follow-up question, but I'll move on to Aisha for the sake of time. So Aisha, do you want to give us your background of what's happening in Pakistan? Let's go back to the journey to 2017, I think it was, or 2015, when you started your when Pakistan started its advocacy around changing the law to protect trans people. And we saw an amazing law to be passed in 2018, and then all of a sudden things changed in 2021. So I think let's just sort of go back and let's walk that journey.
Yeah. Thank you, Ricky, for the question, and good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm representing the modern trans women of Pakistan, as well as I'm also representing the Khwaja Sara culture, which is also known as the Hijra culture in Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. And we have a rich history even before the inception of Pakistan and India, before the British invasion. So there was always a strong visibility of trans women in this Hijra culture. And as Ricky mentioned, that in 2017 we started working and lobbying for the transgender law in Pakistan, and after 2 years of all the hard work and advocacy, we were able to get the first law for the transgender people, the Transgender Persons Act 2018. And that was a very important step because it gave the recognition for the trans people, and we got the recognition as a third gender. It was a non-binary. I would also like to talk a little bit about the concept of non-binary, because the concept of non-binary in the West is very different from that we have in Pakistan. So we do have 3 official gender markers in Pakistan: male, female, and X for trans people. But trans women, especially, and trans men, they do identify, mostly in Pakistan, they do identify with the binary. They use the binary pronouns for themselves. So in 2018, we got the law, we got the legal recognition for transgender, and Pakistan became the country which officially recognizes 3 genders. And then we started working on the implementation to reduce the hate crimes for trans, because there was a huge number of trans murders happening. Violence cases were a lot, because the trans community in Pakistan were always marginalized and on a vulnerable position, because after the British invasion and when they brought the Criminal Crimes Act, the trans community, the Hijra community, although they were very present and we have a very strong organized culture, but we were taken out of the mainstream professions, and the prevailing options that are available for the trans women in Pakistan is begging, or they have to perform on weddings, on sex work. But after 2018, when we got the trans law, the government and the activists and all the CSOs and trans organizations, we worked to bring the trans community, the Khwaja Sara community, back to the mainstream. And my organization in Pakistan, we have been working with the government, with the federal and the provincial government, to bring different programs to economically empower the trans community and make them part of the mainstream professions. Like now we have a doctor who is a visible trans. We have trans people in police in Pakistan now. Um, so so everything was going in a positive direction until 2021, when this right-wing religious movement started against this Trans Act, and some of these right-wing extremists, they challenged the Transgender Act in the Shariat court of Pakistan. So Shariat court is basically a religious court in the country. So they challenge the trans law on the basis that this law is anti-Islam, and it's an attack on the family system in Pakistan, and it's a Western propaganda. So all these, the slogans that we listen, that mostly the right-wing people have, and so for the past 2 years we have been fighting this case in the Shariat court. And so this year in 2023 in May, the judgment came, and after 2 years of hearings, the judgment was in the favor of the petitioners, and it has declared the trans law to be anti-Islam, and they have basically targeted the section of self-determination which was there in the act, and they want to replace it with a medical evaluation, because in Pakistan we have a very different debate. Since you were asking my co-panelist about the trans and intersex movement, so in Pakistan, the right-wing people, they are of the view that only intersex people should be considered the true transgender person, and only they should be given the third recognition. And now they're trying to bring conversion therapies for trans people. They're pathologizing it. They say that gender dysphoria is a mental disorder and it should be, treated with the conversion therapy. So, so all the work that we were doing on the depathologization, now it's we have to go back again from the zero, and again we have to sensitize all the stakeholders that this is not mental illness. So the discussion, the debate in the West is very different from what's happening in Pakistan right now. So in Pakistan, trans women are trying to clarify their basic gender identity and trying to differentiate it from being intersex. So this is a little background, and I think we'll talk more about the solutions later in the panel.
Great. So a follow-up question to that. So if currently, with the reversal of the law, pardon me, the Sharia court is saying that they are protecting intersex people, on what basis are they able to validate that? Do they have to go for special tests, examinations? How do they determine whether one is genuinely intersex? I mean, what's the basis of determination? And then also, I mean, do they, is it invasive? Is it some form of invasive observation, or do they have to go for surgeries, or what's the actual process of this is what an intersex person is, and this person needs to be protected?
Yeah, Ricky, that's a very interesting question. So actually, everything is very vague. Even if you see the judgment of the Shariat Court, you don't really find a clear definition of intersex people. And I'd also like to mention that these right-wing extremists, they have been using two platforms. One platform was the Shariat Court, and the other platform was the Parliament. So they have also tabled a new bill known as the Khunsa bill. So Khunsa is an Arabic word which is used for intersex, and the definition that they have given for intersex is academically wrong definitions. So
if you don't mind me asking, what is the definition?
So
if you know, I mean,
So in one,
not to put you on the spot.
So they mostly, I mean, the definition that they have been using is that some person who has both the genitalia is intersex, and sorry, one of the parliamentarian, because then I think that in the last 2 years there was a huge campaign and a negative media campaign going on that everybody was talking about this issue, and many parliamentarians submitted their own version of amendment bill. So one of the parliamentarians submitted a bill, and that was so funny. So according to her definition of intersex, it was somebody who uses one hole to pee. And then there was like a lot of criticism that I think that's every human being uses one hole to pee. So this is the level of their understanding of what intersex is. So that is why everything is so vague right now. They have to lay down the policies, how they are going to define what intersex is, and then they also need to define what medical board, what experts would be there. So that's a long debate. But the good thing is that according to the constitution, when there's the judgment of the Shariat court, there's a time period of appeal. So the trans activists and we and my organization have submitted a petition challenging the judgment of the Shariat court in the Supreme Court of Pakistan. So right now, technically, the transgender law is valid as it was until the Supreme Court decides on it. So now we are waiting for the hearing of the Supreme Court. So right now, the judgment of Shariat court is not being applied because it has been challenged in the Supreme Court. So now again, we have to do this lobbying and advocacy, and basically educating all the parliamentarians again on gender and the basic concepts of gender identity and how it is different from biological sex.
So it sounds to me as though there's no real basis for determination of who is intersex or who is transgender or transdiverse. But speaking to the work that's being done, what do you think caused the shift from 2015 to 2017 to now to 2021? Would you link this to a bigger monster like the anti-gender movement? I mean, are they well funded? What's behind how did we get to where we are now, as opposed to what we were 5 years ago?
Yeah, so since I mentioned that since 2021 there was this massive media campaign against the trans law, and interestingly, all these right-wing extremists, the narrative that they are using is all the narratives of the West. So whatever we see in West, what's happening in the West, and I think my co-panelists will also talk about it in detail. So they are just copy and pasting it in Pakistan. For example, there was also a very interesting incident that that there's this washroom debate going on in US. So there were some videos of trans women in the US, and they were using a female washroom, and there was some kind of issue. So the Pakistani extremists, they copied that video and said, see, this is what's happening in Pakistan, and these trans women are hijacking women's spaces and harassing women and blah blah blah, and there was some rape case which was of the West, and they were saying it in Pakistan. Then we Pakistani trans activists said that this is a very Western concept. In Pakistan, we always had a very we coexisted because we have this rich, as I mentioned in my start of my speech, that Khwaja culture was always there, and gender diversity was always celebrated in our land even before the British invasion. So we told them that you are the people who are bringing this Western concepts here, because the native trans community in Pakistan, the Khwaja culture, the community was always respected, and we coexisted with women. And there's this culture that trans women go and bless to the newborn babies, and they integrate with the families. And so there has been no single case of harassment or rape in Pakistan. So you said that, and even the video that they were showing was a Western video. So this is how we are now building our strong narrative, and using our rich culture and history, because we all know that people in human rights, we are always being attacked of being a Western agent. So and this is now we are telling them that you are the people who are bringing these Western narratives in our country, because our land has always celebrated gender diversity, and we never had this washroom debate in our country. So so all these, and now we are seeing the narratives that these right-wing and especially these YouTubers have made a lot of business in Pakistan. Most of the YouTubers has had few hundred followers, and since they started talking against the trans law, now they have million and billion of followers. So now there's also this business involved, and all the YouTubers and social media influencers, they are using trans and these and mixing it with LGBT, because this is a very sellable topic in Pakistan, because in our country sexuality is taboo, and people like to listen to these taboo things, and so they are increasing their business and putting our lives on stake.
Yeah, as I heard in some conference, if you, I think I was in Brazil or in Mexico, when the US or the UK sneeze, the rest of the world catches a cold. And I think in this case, it's pretty evident when we speak about the anti-rights movement. It starts somewhere, and I think it has a breeding ground in the global north, more so the UK and the United States, and really as a way to erase trans identities. That's really what it is about, right? And so I think moving on to like a bigger picture, to sort of put all our dots together, I'll hand it over to Leanne.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's really nice to see a lot of people who've been calling me over the last few years saying, what the heck is going on in the UK? When I know, I'll come and let you know. But I did, yeah, it's obviously not a light topic, and I really like the title of this session, and I think it's a very welcome title about trans liberation, because we're used to convening and talking about human rights and dignity, and we're now in a space which I think is a very dark space, and we really need to hang together. So I really thank Outright for this invitation, and to sort of echo the words that were given at the very beginning of the session from Maria about how there are big shifts happening globally. We can see what's been happening in the UK, being exported to other parts of the world. There are movements that are very well funded, that range across a number of areas of influence, whether it's we classify them as extreme right, or it's the TERF movement, the religious actors, political leaders, and the like. We can name all of those things, and I'm going to be very careful in not naming anyone specifically, because I don't want to get sued anymore. So, like, as an organization, and one of the things I do want to get to after going, not me personally, but I don't have anything, but is to talk a bit about the strategies, and to basically learn from other people in the room about what you're doing and what you think is worth doing. So I think in terms of describing what's going on, I hate to represent the West, but I'm looking at other people in the room who are saying the West. I think we do have to locate a lot of the discourse that started in terms of anti-gender movement, that has obviously moved now into a very clear space of anti-trans movement, and look at it from the perspective of how do we get there, and basically get as granular as we need to be to understand what are the objections that are being made to what are considered as the claim for very basic human rights. So I've got a notebook, trust me, I'm not going to go through it all, but I just really want to make sure that in terms of the timeline, in the sort of the headline chapters, that we're really clear about looking at the UK as a case study about actually how quickly things can move in a very negative direction. Because it was only, several years ago, 2014, 2016, that we were looking for making amendments to the Gender Recognition Act of 2004. So as Stonewall and the colleagues that we work with, we're part of a collective of LGBTQI organizations, of trans-led organizations that are basically going forward and trying to make improvements in the laws and policies that are meant to protect us all. So it was smooth sailing. I'm very simplifying this, but it was smooth sailing for the first couple of years. There was an interest and political interest in actually changing the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 to basically demedicalize it, do what everyone else in the world has already, well, a number of other countries in the world have done, which is to demedicalize it, depathologize it, and to actually make it about self-determination, and basically do what is the appropriate thing to do. Only to find that over the course of 4 or 5 years of having political buy-in, very extensive consultation which showed that there was public support, there was very little pushback about actually making these changes, only to find as we were ascending towards what was a very clear policy objective for legislative change, to find that the voices that were against this change, that had been very, very small and minor, had grown and had found each other in a way that was very difficult. And I think it's really important to think about what the struggle for us as a movement has been in the UK. Is very difficult to name them or hold them to account. So you're working with individuals who are basically accountable to no one. They don't necessarily have organizations. They can basically say what they want. They're very politically connected. They're connected across borders. And I'm not sure many of you are, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of Sonia Carrero on basically talking about the Hydra. I think that's such a strong way of thinking of it for me, basically trying to figure out what are the elements of this movement that stands against us, and how do you address it? Because we're advocates, we're activists. We basically try and develop strategies to work towards our shared goal, which is to claim our rights and to actually have those conversations and to construct campaigns in order to reach those goals. But I think the Hydra is such an important example, because there's just many parts that aren't even necessarily accountable to each other, but are formed by a common interest in actually, a number of common interests, but basically that ultimately in their end goal limit LGBTQI rights, and specifically trans people's rights. So we can maybe get into a little bit more what the reasoning is behind that. But if you look at where the journey has been in the UK, moving towards what we thought was a fairly straightforward claim for our community's rights, to a space now where we have had we're basically lagging behind. We've gone from one of the leading countries in Europe in terms of LGBTQI rights to being in the 17th position in the space of 8 years. Year over year, we've had an 11% increase in hate crime against trans people. We're losing more than we're winning, put it that way, and we're investing a lot of energy into this campaign. So from that high watermark moment of claiming the space to have legislative change, having a consultation, ensuring that the public was behind it, we've gone to a space where actually the reforms for gender recognition have been put on hold. I see a colleague here from Wales. I mean, I would invite you to talk about what it must feel like to be in Welsh government and dealing with this process. And we also have been stalled on the ban on conversion practices, which we thought, again, was a fairly straightforward approach to what was a change that was taking place in countries around the world, and that was actually very commonsensical to have as a basic approach to respect for all of our rights. So I see, Ricky, I'm looking at the clock. That's like being in court with, those numbers ticking away. But like
you're still good on time.
I'm still good on time. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just mindful that, it takes time to figure out what's going on and where the points of contact are. But I think if we were to look more wholesomely at the key areas where we had expected change, and to see that we haven't been able to get governments to deliver on them, there are a number of actors, both politically, religious, individuals who are eminent and who are well connected, the media. I mean, I hope we have time to talk about that strange beast in the UK, which is the media, sitting in an organization where in basically 3 or 4 months we had over 1,000 mentions of our organization, and we as Stonewall have become equivalent, made an equivalent of those people who stand for trans rights, which is ridiculous because we're part of a very broad movement, but seen as actually for asking for, it seems to be too much, too fast, and in a political context that is really quite toxic. So I guess a lot of people will say there's been a moral panic stirred up, and some of the things that you talked about, it really does hold true, that there has been such an oversimplification about how these rights in action would work, and people who are fearful of our community. And that in and of itself makes considered challenge, debate, and discussion very, very difficult when it's become more of an oppositional as opposed to a dialogue. So we really, I'm not saying we're stuck now, we've always got a lot of strategies, but we're trying to basically pursue an outcome of trans liberation, but are working against some very, very challenging odds. The last thing I'll say is that Stonewall works both with corporates. And it's very ironic to sit in an organization where when we're working with our corporate partners, that they are doing more to advance trans people's rights within their corporate entities than many governments are around the world. So there are pathways forward, but I am very worried about what you were saying earlier, I think it was Maria, about the period of time that many of us are working into next year, which is elections in, what did you say, 41%? Now it's a good internet source, I'd check that. But anyway, if it's probably, it is significant and it's huge. I'm gonna stop talking. But I would like us, if we could, during Q&A, to talk about what it is that we're doing and on the specifics of what's happening with Gender Recognition Act, conversion practices, the general tone in the UK. We were fortunate enough to have the independent expert, Victor Madrigal, come to the country, do a country report, and in May 2023, he issued a report that is very, very comprehensive. Last thing, if I may, what we found as well is that we've had to reach well with the outside of the influences that we can have in the UK to international mechanisms. So we've spent a lot of time trying to get our Equality and Human Rights Commission before GANRI, which is the supervisory body. Happy to say that last week they finally have said that they will now review the A category status of the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is a very serious thing to do, simply because they aren't being independent and the legal advice that they're given is questionable by any standard of international human rights law. And we've had to grapple with, I'm just looking around the room, people who were helping to grapple with the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, effectively helping herself into a process which was about domestic legislation uninvited. So it's been interesting, but I'm not going to pretend that it's been easy, and it's expensive. So I guess my final message would be, get ready to work in these spaces, because you will lose support at the same time that you will need to be investing more heavily in actually creating the strategies to counter this movement and basically not having the same kind of partners along the way that you might normally have had. So that sounds a sad place to end, but please read the report by Madrigal. It's very enlightening, and I think we owe him a debt.
So I think just sort of lift your mood a bit.
Yeah,
we're going to go move into strategies next, but so I just like to, so one of the panelists that was meant to be here is not here today because she's been taken ill in Spain, and she sent me something, and I will just sort of pick something out of the gains they've had in Spain, and which is something I wanted to dwell on to sort of counter this discussion. So subsequent to the law approval in 2022, they also have an anti-discrimination law passed in 2023, and what it means is that they have laws against discrimination for trans equality, depathologization of trans identities, recognition of trans minors, health treatments for trans people, bans on operations on intersex babies. They also have a national strategic plan for LGBTI people, which protects their laws. They also have defined laws for labor insertion and equal treatment in companies. However, the non-binary identities have been left out of legal gender recognition. That's something that we need to sort of dwell on there. However, reading the remainder of her submission, in the last 3 years, there's been a rise in clearly anti-trans editorial lines within the media, and it comes out very strongly in your presentation, Aisha, and in your presentation, Leanne, the strength of the media really trying to invisibilize us as trans people. So I think, and I'm not sure if, and I'm going to put you all on the spot here, what do you think it would take to make some progress in the right direction to even touch the tip of the iceberg of the gains that Spain has had in your respective countries? If it's not possible, let's say it. If you think it is, let's maybe have a conversation, or we can speak among ourselves if we had to compare. So what came clearly from the conversation here, between Aisha and TP, was the effect of colonization. You've inherited these laws that have propagated this discrimination and just made life worse for you at the advent of colonization. So that's one thing, is how do we overcome, or how do we rid ourselves of these laws that we've inherited in a culture that really is not ours, that's been imposed on us by a foreign master who's just left us in the lurch upon independence, right? That's number one. And then looking at the bigger picture of the anti-gender movement, we're looking at fighting against culture, which is also woven into the colonial laws. We're looking at advancing a medical model that's not pathologizing for trans people. We also are looking at how best we can fight the attacks of the media. And Matuba's not here; he's our media person. But in the event last night, one of the speakers was very clear that the editorial policy is the one that shapes the narrative in all the newspapers. So how do we infiltrate those systems? And what strategies could we use to even maybe gain small wins in those situations?
You can go first.
Okay. So I think, Ricky, I think in every culture we can use this strategy in terms of Pakistan, and this is what we are doing. Like, as I also mentioned, that we also question these right-wing narratives. And for example, right now in Pakistan, there's this debate going on that trans people are mentally sick and they should go through the conversion therapies. So now we are questioning them that, okay, if you want to treat it as a medical condition, then you need to bring the academic references and statistics that how many people have been healed with the conversion therapies and how many lives have been better. I think with this logical argument and discussions, and especially emphasizing on the academic references and the facts, this is how I think we can put pressure on the right wing also, because if you are lobbying on a policy level, you need to give right academic definition. And to begin with, as I mentioned earlier, they are even unable to define what intersex is, because all of them are lobbying for the intersex law, and they are failing to provide a correct medical academic definition for it. And similarly, because there was this long, decades of experience with the APA and WPAT declaring conversion therapies illegal and unethical for the people of, for the sexual minorities, and for later on for the gender identity as well, and changing the name from gender identity disorder (GID) to gender dysphoria, so that the pathologization should be reduced, the stigma should be reduced. So in Pakistan, it's very, it's sad, but it's also funny that they're just using emotions of people in the name of religion in Pakistan, and just provoking, because we are very emotional people when it comes to religion. And so I think the strategy that we are using is questioning them, and to raise awareness on the basis of the medical evidence that we have, the academic evidence we have. And this is so we need platforms where we can question them and ask them to bring references that, okay, even if you're using the religious perspective. So I would also like to mention this interesting background in Pakistan, that there's a group of trans people who are into how should I say it, what do we say tabligh in English? How do we say it? Preaching. Yeah, so there's a group of religious preachers in Pakistan which go from country to country to preach about Islam, and so they also reached out to the trans people, the Khwajasara people, and they convinced them that you should leave begging and dancing and you should come back to God and be the servants of God and preach about Islam. So there's a group of trans people, trans women particularly, that they stopped wearing feminine clothes because all these religious scholars, they told them that this is un-Islamic and you should stop wearing lipstick and makeup, cut your hair, and get back to your masculine gender expression and preach. So they did that, but now we question them that, okay, if you think that conversion therapy is going to help and this religious healing is going to help, but even you have changed the clothes of trans women, but even now when they go for preaching, having that male masculine dresses on them, they still are feminine, so this is, so we are questioning them that what is the solution that you have, because if you are advocating for conversion therapies and if you are advocating for spiritual or religious healing, you need to give us results. You were unable to change the gender identity. You can force trans women to cut their beautifully long hair, but you can't make them masculine. You can't, so this is the, I think, study that we need to question people on the basis of facts, because I think we as activists, and I always say this very clearly, that why we have to be on the other side of the table. I think now it's time that we should stop giving answers and start asking questions. So that's the strategy that we need to take, and that's what we are doing in Pakistan.
I like that.
Yeah.
So quickly, TP,
Oh yeah.
and then we open up for questions.
Yeah. I think it would be around the issues of unlearning. In Africa, we both know that when it comes to the LGBTQ movement, we are always accused of adopting the Western behavior. So now there is a new window that is opening around African cultural or traditional religious stuff that is coming up, where we see more people coming up practicing the expressing their African religion. So I'm seeing intersectionality on that level, because now it opens for diversity, and also it opens for challenging of how people think. So it's also about going back to the values of African people, looking back into the aspect of family, where we knew that I'm not just a child of my mother or my father. I'm raised by the community. I'm the child of the community. It positions even people who are unable to biologically give birth to kids to also have a parental role within the communities. So we know that the anti-gender movement also comes with the definition of the family. So it's about opening up the scope to say all of us can be parents and all of us are one family. So it's about also leveraging on the existing opportunities within the existing movements. So yeah, I think that will be the strategy that I can put on the table. But also with the fact that most of our countries are now looking into cleaning their houses in the aspect of legal frameworks. We know that most of our countries are working with the old laws, like 1981 laws and 1960 something laws. So now, like the countries like Lesotho are working towards reviewing the constitution and reviewing some of the policy frameworks. So it's about positioning ourselves also to uplift or build the voice of the communities collectively to challenge the narrative or the language within the laws, and making sure that we are also visible in the system for protection of people's rights, regardless of their identities. So it's all about dealing with being patient, which is one key word that we need to do, because there is too much pressure on the movement, where you see that we are also pushing ourselves at the corner where we feel we are more powerful than the government or the entities, so much that we feel we can always, I'm sorry to say this, but we can always take our governments to courts for them to fix the laws. But at some point, we need to be patient and journey with the governments and understand where they are. Also document the voices of the communities and their experiences to build our cases, so that when we participate and allow our communities to participate in the process, then we have a collective voice that builds the entire nation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I make one quick point on media? It's really quick.
Yes, please.
I like what you did. I like that.
We have time.
We have time. Yeah, in addition to what's been said, I mean, I think obviously centering the voices of trans people is vital. And I think that what we've learned, we've studied the media a lot because we've had to. And we're sharpening up the quotes we give so that they can't be, cut or edited in a way that may change the meaning of them. We do meet with the editorial teams. We work a lot with staff networks within media organizations who are part of the sort of the employee resource groups that are focusing on LGBTQI rights. But one of the things that I think is really important, and I've learned, is the need to support the spokespeople and leaders, because it's an extremely exposing position to be in. It's exhausting. It makes you insecure. People know where you live. So I think that one of the things I really was hoping to get across before leaving is the importance of supporting leaders, and for leaders of our organizations to have the time just to be with each other, because it's really, really tough position to be in, and it does affect your personal life. It affects your well-being. It affects your sense of security. So I think with media, we need to be really clear that they have an accountability to actually ensure that they keep us safe and secure. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you.
Just one aspect.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I also want to believe that we have to be mindful of how we shape our advocacy work.
Yeah.
Because we seem to center ourselves within gender, forgetting that, yes, we are gendered people, but forgetting that we have other aspects, the social aspect, the economic aspect, and other aspects of life. So we have to be mindful that we don't only engage or interact within a small scale, but we also open up for other aspects of life. I'm saying this because as the community, we are also seen as the HIV cases. So if we're not HIV cases, we are also the gender-centered people. But we also have a life to live. So we have to look to tap into other aspects of life of people, so to ensure that we build our case.
Great. Good point. Okay, so with that, I think we will open up, if you have nothing else to say, my esteemed
Which is
panelists.
unusual for me. I have nothing left to say.
I will open up to the floor for questions. And what's happening with the online questions? Is anything happening there? Okay, one. Oh, a whole one. Thank you. Okay, so let's.
We stand between you and lunch.
Hello, everyone. Again, Nadeem here. And I have a very important point, which we are neglecting here, that in neighboring Pakistan, there is Afghanistan. And when the fall of Kabul happened, we're talking about trans liberation. The trans people have been killed mercilessly over there. So they had no way to escape. They had to come to Pakistan because they had no exit point. That was the only exit point they had. They couldn't go to Russia. Pakistan was the only exit point, and the flights were coming here. So we were the only organizations who created a safe house with the help of some of our donors here, and we tried in these 2 years to transport like more than 200 people to different Western countries where they are going there, but still it's still going on. And now when the Pakistani government has put a stern law on the Afghan people that they cannot stay in Pakistan, and they have to, and the immigrants, I'm sure many people would be knowing about it, that they have to leave Pakistan forcefully now. So again, this trans movement needs to be, strongly be advocated, and the killing of those trans people, whose lives are in danger. They're very close to Pakistan because Mostly they speak Pashto, which is very close to KPK culture we have in Pakhtun culture in Pakistan. So they blend in very well over there. But now, when the police is trying to find them,
Yeah.
they're trying to harass them, and if they find them without documents, they are instantly being sent to back to Afghanistan, where they are being killed mercilessly. So I think so. People sitting here need to work on this, and we need to have a strategy on that. And in that context, we need to have a strong media policy, like we were talking about media. And secondly, the point which Aisha raised, that to question people. The Trans Act that we made in Pakistan and which has been challenged now, and now we are fighting in the Supreme Court. Scientifically speaking, like what Aisha said, we have questions to the other side. Have they considered talking to any gender experts in the world to tell what a transgender person is? I mean, there are highly educated gender experts in the world whose opinion can be counted and medical references can be given. So you have to develop a strategy in such a way that is helpful for everyone. So one is the trans movement in Afghanistan, and how we can save the lives of the people of Afghan transgender people who are coming to Pakistan. Of course, there are LGBT people also, but being appearance-wise, if they look like women and if they are men, they're quite safe. But the trans people have another expression. If they are more feminine in their outlook and they're speaking like that, even though Aisha said when they are going out for preaching, they have this feminine expression. So their lives are more in danger. So we, at this point, we need to help them out, because there's no other point. Only Pakistan is available for them as a safe haven. So we need to have policies. I was listening to the World Bank people here. They were talking here, but have they talked to the Pakistani government or any such institutions where they are focusing on this point also? Because communities, we have the slogan that communities can be helped, are more helpful if they are led by community people.
Yeah.
Like if a transgender community organization exists, it can help more effectively to a trans person because they understand the problems. So are the stakeholders trying to convince people, the main stakeholders like the governments, to how to involve and how to evolve in their strategies to be more effective for these kind of saving lives and stop this ferocious killings that are going on, and how we can influence media to be more positive, and how we can work together with them.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Yes.
Bom dia, gente. Meu nome é Patrícia Borges, sou do Brasil. Não sei falar inglês, mas eu quero falar algumas palavras e o meu companheiro vai trazer o que eu quero falar. Ok?
Perfect.
She's saying that her name is Patricia, and my name is Guimo Allen, they, them pronouns. I'm the executive director of LGBT. I'm going to speak in behalf of my colleague, who's the director of development, and a few words that she has written. I am Patricia Borges da Silva, a Brazilian black trans woman who has spent 33 years struggling to surmount a lifetime of daunting personal hurdles. At the age of 5, I was left motherless, kicked out of my home by my crack-addicted father. At 13, I was forced to survive on the streets by engaging in child prostitution. The physical trauma remains visible in the many scars I bear, imposed by these harsh realities. In 2010, while living in the streets in São Paulo, I was falsely accused and wrongly detained for a crime I did not commit. Although witnesses recognized the real perpetrators and confirmed my innocence, I spent 6 months behind bars in Guarulhos with no access to legal aid. There, I was subjected to inhumane conditions intended to annihilate my female identity. Trapped in a flawed justice system, and despite a clear absence of evidence, I was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison for charges based only on the testimony of police officers who did not witness what happened. Held in a men's prison. The violence I suffered in prison was unspeakable, and I will not describe these experiences in greater detail here. However, it is vital to understand that I was a victim of physical and sexual abuse, forced to negotiate for my life on a daily basis. After my release, I continued to suffer abuse and discrimination, even within my own family. However, I received an unexpected inheritance that gave me a fresh start. And since then, I have devoted my life to activism, fighting for the dignity and acknowledgement of my peers. I'm currently working on projects that provide significant care for vulnerable members of the trans community. As a former parliamentary advisor of Congresswoman Erica Hilton and working in the institutional relations era of Vote LGBT, I have been an active and influential voice on Brazil's political and social stage, fighting for the rights of the LGBTQ+ community to be heard and respected. My story is one of resilience and endurance, the narrative of a woman who persevered through untold adversity, turning pain into purpose in the unending battle for equality. This affidavit is intended to explain the circumstances of a past scared by adversity and injustice. It reaffirms my commitment to building a fairer or more equal society for us all. São Paulo, 29th of November, 2023.
Thank you.
This affidavit, now it's me speaking, was the affidavit that she had to present to the visa officers to get her visa denial changed. She had on Monday, 1 week ago, she had her visa denied to come to the States to be in the conference that Victory had generously invited her. Okay, even with Victory's recommendation letter, in 4 days we have managed.
Yeah.
With the strong testimony of this person to change the position that is unheard of.
Yeah.
She got her visa on a Friday, and since Saturday she's here, and I think we should give a round of applause for this person. So our question to this amazing panel is...
Thank you. So we need to move on. We have more questions, and I'd like to talk to you after this conversation, right?
My name is Lila. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm here representing Lesbian Global with this group. And my question rests within the themes that all of you were discussing, which haven't quite been named, but the disparities between trans communities across nations, across cultures, faiths, and even within trans people and identities themselves, between masculinity and femininity. And so I'm wondering, just among like you excellent thinkers, how we can not only acknowledge and understand our disparities between our trans identities and communities, but use our differences to uplift one another across these spaces.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. May El-Sidani, I'm with the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy. Aisha, I want to thank you for talking about the moral panic that starts in the West, particularly around restrooms, and spreads to the rest of the world and is weaponized. It's something I've seen as well working in the Arabic-speaking MENA region, particularly in Lebanon. And I'm curious, kind of, in that case, we're seeing what starts as transphobia evolve into broader anti-LGBT sentiment, homophobia, et cetera. And I'm curious to what degree there's a conversation around advocacy or solidarity and response to that without conflating what trans communities need, which is sometimes distinct from what the broader LGBT community needs. What's the conversation like globally in places like Pakistan or in other places as well? How do we kind of stand in solidarity without, again, kind of making it sound like everything is the same, but noting that the other side, that unfortunately the hate is generalized in that way? Thank you.
Thank you. And our last question.
Hi, I'm Rachel Burton from the Bank Information Center, and my question is for TP. We're actually monitoring a social protection project in Lesotho right now, and what we have seen in the design of that project is that LGBTQI+ people are not mentioned in the project. There's a lot of discussion around vulnerable groups, and I'm curious, there is mention of HIV and AIDS, and I'm wondering your thoughts around, is that a good entry point? How do we use that to open the conversations for the inclusion of LGBTQI+ people? Also, along those lines, how much training, capacity building, et cetera, does the government of Lesotho need on this issue to be able to actively engage and to be able to ensure that that LGBTQI plus people can actually benefit from social protection projects. Thanks.
Thanks. Yes. That's the next one, yeah.
So I think this actually kind of goes a little bit with what our friend from over here was saying from the lesbians group, is that there's often strong intersections between trans, intersex, and non-binary issues. So any thoughts on creating stronger allyships and working strategically to strengthen advocacy? And the chat has been specifically kind of focusing on child protection, and I think intersex conversation was about how child protection laws have been really effective for intersex communities, but then on the other hand have been very harmful against transgender communities. Is there kind of a balance and a way to work in allyship?
Okay, so if we have no more questions, we have 4 minutes left, 4.5. So I think, can we combine, Aisha, can we combine your questions around moral panic? And do you want to take this question on the intersex trans, and then we could possibly help you? Leanne, if you could take the first question on strategies.
Sure.
And then TP, if you can speak to the World Bank question, as well as how we can achieve solidarity and uplift each other.
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
Yes.
Go for it.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. Where is that girl? So it's very interesting because in some background, especially from the Muslim culture that we come from, it's very difficult to even bring the discussion of sexual orientation to the table. And then we have to be very careful with what words we have to use and how we are going to go about. And so I'll just share one example that what I'm personally following now, because after 2021, when this anti-trans movement started happening, all the prominent trans activists in Pakistan, including myself, were labeled as LGBT promoters. We were labeled as gay, and there's someone who is promoting Western propaganda and blah blah blah. So because of the rich history of trans culture, Khwajasara culture in our region, they cannot directly criticize the trans identity. So they mix us with LGB, and they like calling us, we are men and we are gay and we just want to have sex and life, and that's it. So what now we are doing is, because again the strategy of questioning, that if the culture of Pakistan and the family system of Pakistan is so much in danger, and the biggest threat to Pakistan, despite of all our economic situation going on, is the LGBT, because this is what they have portrayed, that the biggest threat to Pakistan is the LGB thing. So what we are doing is that we are questioning that, okay, if you're so scared of lesbian and gay rights, then stop sending your children to get higher education in these developed Western countries where LGBT flags are seen everywhere. So if Muslim people, they can live in coexistence in all these Western countries where you have all kinds of visibility of LGBT, and then that is not damaging the family lives of Muslims living in Europe and US, then I think we should also start this discussion in our home, then what really the threat is. So we need to talk more about the coexistence, and I think this is how we can also build strong alliances with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So can we move on to TP really in 30 seconds?
No worries.
Okay, 1 minute.
Okay.
I can do 15 seconds.
No problem. But
Ricky is being
otherwise, I think for me, I wasn't aware of the project mentioned. It sounds very interesting, and I would like to learn more about it, and we are happy to join it. For engagement with the government and the trainings, I think we'll engage with the, yeah. Otherwise, I'm interested in the first question asked around how do we uplift one another in our different identities. The question that I can ask is how aware are we? How much aware are we of the different identities that we have? because you might be different from me, but me without understanding you, that's where the challenge is. We have to learn as the communities to understand our diversities so that we can start engaging and working together. Thank you.
Thanks. And then to wrap us
I'll
up.
do the wipe up in like 15 seconds or less. I mean, clearly, and I said the LGBTQI movement, it had to stand alone for the longest time because mainstream human rights organizations wouldn't necessarily work on our issues. I mean, I think the concerns that we have now are testament to the fact that we need to work cross-movement and intersectionally. To me, that goes without saying. I did want to speak quickly on the issue of Afghanistan because we work daily with trans people who are stuck in Afghanistan and stuck in Pakistan. So I call out to any of you who have any influence whatsoever in your government. Trans people are most affected by what's going on right now. Daily, we learn of more of our clients and people we're trying to support to get a resettlement outcome who are never going to make it out of the country and they are suffering unspeakable human rights violations. So we have systems in place that are meant to look after people on the move. Where's UNHCR? What are they doing to hold their local implementing partners accountable to our community? And that's a big discussion that's happening in Geneva next week. I hope a number of you are there because we absolutely need to do better. The only government right now that's resettling people is the German government, and they have made a priority for trans people, thank God. But you're raising a really vital question, and I think that it's something that this room should be aware of because even though this is about trans liberation, in those sorts of contexts, being people on the move, trans people have historically and are currently the most vulnerable of any of the LGBT community on the move.
Thank you so much, Dan. And so this is about trans liberation, and speaking to that point, trans people need to be free to live wherever they want to live, as they want to live. And that's one of the reasons we're celebrating legal gender recognition at Outright. And we are telling of the benefits that we get as individuals, up to and including an existence without any discrimination, or being allowed to live, being allowed to vote, and being allowed to have a job. And that's what we really want for all the trans people. I'd like to thank you for your indulgence, for me going over time. For us going over time. And I'd like to thank my esteemed panelists that were like really great. I'd like to thank all of you for listening.